welcome to our new series, In Their Own Words, where we're taking a moment to highlight our diverse tennis leaders. Today, I want to welcome Toni Wiley, Executive Director of Sportsmen's Tennis and Enrichment Center in Dorchester, Massachusetts. How are you doing today, Toni?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm doing really good.
Good.
Even despite all of the crazy that has been happening in our world and being that we're so close to the events that happened last week, I did want to just take a quick moment to get your thoughts and insights about the state of our nation right now.
You know, it's hard to even answer that question because it's hard to know where to begin. Last Wednesday was the culmination of so much pent up anger that finally was on display. The result of what happens when there are just so many lies and inequities that are allowed to pile up until they explode on the scene. So it's hard to know even where to begin because you're piling, as we've said before, you've put an explosion of social justice on top of a pandemic and then added onto that all of this election nonsense. And so it's been a difficult, trying, tiring year. But I think we all have to stay the course. We all have to remember that we have young people that are watching us to see what our reactions are. And we have to keep our reactions both measured and true. So beyond that, I'm not sure how else to respond.
No, and Toni, I really appreciate you taking a moment to reflect with us. So to switch gears entirely, let's jump into our conversation for today. And I'm really curious to know your tennis story. How did you get into tennis? How did you arrive at Sportsman's? All that good stuff.
So I have no tennis backstory. As some people would say, I don't have tennis DNA, a phrase that I've heard a lot. I have a background. My more recent professional background was in nonprofit development and management. And I came into Sportsmans from that perspective. The organization was struggling and I came on board as a consultant and then a board member and then moved into the executive director role, really because we had a nonprofit organization that was failing. The fact that it was in my own neighborhood, that it's the first African-American owned and operated nonprofit indoor club in the country was certainly not lost on me. So I came in really just to sort of try and right the ship and learn all I could about the organization and about tennis and about, the concept of managing this sort of semi business versus nonprofit organization, because we really do both. We are a mission driven nonprofit, but we run a tennis club. And so you cannot pay the bills with goodwill. And you cannot throw your mission out the door and just totally focus on running the club. You really have to walk the line. So it's been a great 12 and a half years for me to learn about tennis, to learn about the USTA and NJTL, to grow to love the sport. Now I play as much as I can, which isn't very much and isn't very well, but I play as much as I can. And I've definitely fallen in love with tennis as much as I've fallen in love with Sportsmen's.
That's awesome. We have a lot in common because I too do not have tennis DNA and I also come from the nonprofit space. So that's really, it's nice to find that commonality because I think it just adds a lens of creativity to some of the issues that we face within the sport. So that's such a fun fact for us to build upon.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit, you mentioned about Sportsmen's being the oldest African-American run nonprofit in the country, which is such a cool fun fact. I throw that out a lot in some of my other D&I related speaking engagements. So can you tell us a little bit more about the history of Sportsmen's and how it's come to be this really truly inclusive space? I mean, the last time I was there pre-pandemic, I saw everybody, right, and it was just the most refreshing moment. It was like such a cool thing to experience in this work in tennis. So I'd love to learn more about the history of Sportsmen's and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. Well, Sportsmen's was started by a group of 8 friends, adult players who wanted to have the capacity to introduce the sport to young people with really high quality lessons year round. And they also wanted a place where people of color could play comfortably, sociably throughout the year. So they were playing on a public park in the Boston area, and they approached the city about building Sportsmans and moving up to this area, what is now called Harambe Park, and building this tennis facility. And so they were founded in 1961. I believe it was somewhere in the late 60s where they, began this process and got the legislation approved to move up here. And the buildings, the actual indoor facilities that we have were both built in the late 70s. I'm sorry, the early 70s. So from that beginning, knowing that the facility and the organization was going to be geared towards helping kids get an understanding of tennis and play well enough to get on college teams and take advantage of the scholarships that were out there, and for it to broaden their horizons, for them to get out of Boston and play tournaments and see the surrounding area. There was a recognition that there needed to be an investment in their character and their education so that they were ready for the opportunities that we were hoping that tennis would help them to realize. So even when I came on board in 2008, that mission was still very true. Everybody knew about it. You could speak to it, but we needed to develop the programs that would more intentionally build on the academic programming that was happening in the school system. And so we started there and then began to realize there are all kinds of areas of social and emotional wellness that we also needed to tap into, self-management skills, physical health and wellness. So as an organization, we really see that if we're going to develop healthy adults that play tennis for life and that can go to college and be successful, get through those 4 years, we needed to really work on the whole child. And in the community, as a CTA, we also want to make sure we're providing ample opportunities for adults of all skill levels to get on the court, learn the game or play the game, continue their play competitively or recreationally. And then we also have health and wellness and even some academic programs for adults. So we're sort of a combination of a community center with a tennis program that is as broad in community tennis as we are in developmental instructional tennis, as we are in competitive tennis for juniors and adults.
So as a follow-up question to all of that, what advice do you have for other tennis facilities that may be interested in moving into that space? And also just touching more on how you became so inclusive. How does Sportsmen's, because I think there's a misconception that maybe the Dorchester area is, not as diverse as it is. And I mean, I think there is, predominantly African Americans living in Dorchester, but that doesn't mean there isn't other people, and you see them at Sportsmen's, which is so cool.
Right. I think that if you visit, all the different corners of Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, people would be surprised to find just how diverse this community is, how diverse the Blue Hill Corridor is and has become over the recent decades. So, there are areas that have a really robust Vietnamese population. There is a huge Latinx population here. So we want to reflect Boston. And when we were formed, we realized that the sport of tennis did not reflect Boston. And so what we were able to do was to open our doors in such a way that people of color could come in, play tennis, and help the sport of tennis reflect more of what Boston has to offer and who we are represented by. And today, Boston is represented by every nationality, every faith, everything. And so Sportsmen's needs to reflect that in our membership, in our junior programs, in our staffing, in our partnerships. So we're working very hard to be as inclusive as we possibly can, and to just be welcoming and comfortable. We want everyone to feel like Sportsmen's is their second home.
Yeah, you guys are doing a great job. So just kudos there. So you're pretty much well known in every corner of USTA at this point, which is such a blessing for us. So I'd love to hear more about how you've been able to form such great relationships and keep inclusion at the forefront in those conversations with pretty much, everyone that you interact with at USTA at a local level and at the national level. And then I have a follow-up question to that as well.
Okay. For me, I think it's kind of a blessing that I came into this job not knowing anything really about tennis, because that forced me to really immerse myself in learning who is the USTA? What are you trying to do? What is NJTL? What does the USTA think diversity and inclusion means in the world of tennis? So this has allowed me to really sort of dig in from every possible perspective, in the same way that I've tried to form partnerships throughout the city of Boston that represent every element of who we are and what we do. I need to figure out what are all the different aspects of USTA where sportsmen should have a partnership, or where I can learn more about the game or about how you grow the game. So if there are things that I can only learn by understanding what's going on in player development or what's going on in schools or parks and recreation, I need to be there to hear what USTA has to say. And then I have to realize that the only way the USTA is going to understand what is working or isn't working in Dorchester is if I tell them. There may be, I used to say that you can't sit in White Plains and know what's happening, throughout the country. And that's just as true in Orlando. We have to make sure all of us who are NJTL chapters or CTAs, any of us that work in diverse communities, diverse in any sense of the word, kind of have a responsibility to make sure that the communication flow between us and the USTA is bilateral, that we are learning as much as we are sharing with the USTA, that we are taking our seat at the table, both to hear what's being decided upon and to bring our voices to the table to make sure the USTA knows what we need to grow tennis in our own communities.
That's awesome. So you've mentioned a little bit about NJTL, and I thought it would be great to talk about, the relationship with the USTA Foundation, because I know they've been a good partner to our NJTL network, and with Sportsmans is a part of that. I'd like to actually learn a little bit more about how, did you play a part in becoming an NJTL, or was that something that had already been established when you came to Sportsmans?
So frankly, the Sportsman's relationship with the USTA was a little fractured when I came on board. There was some history, a lot of water under the bridge that just needed to be repaired. So if we were an NJTL chapter, I can say that it was not a well-oiled machine. It was certainly not a strong relationship. We had to start from the beginning and kind of build that relationship.
Yeah. And at least in my last 4 years, I think I've seen a lot of positive changes. I know in New England, at least we are very proud of all of our chapters, and we work super hard to make sure, those relationships are good. And I think we've taken a lot of time to strengthen our own network. And I'm just so happy that you've been a part of all of that. So I think we're going to take a little bit of a pause because we have a few more questions to go, and this is going to be a great 2-part series.
Okay.
So we're going to take a pause, and we will see you in a minute.
Okay.